Thank you, everyone. I've written my words so I don't waste too much time. I'm from the Heiltsuk and Nisga'a nations. In Heiltsuk, we have an insult that means you have no grandma. This is to say you are devoid of ethics. We have a harsher saying, a saying that means you have no ancestors. When I remember this insult, it makes me think of Israelis. When it comes to the occupation of Palestine, they are not one. They are not in harmony. Their ancestors did not show them the culture. They are not welcomed by the land. The US-backed mercenaries have blown apart the land. They pave rubble, soot, steel, and foreign carbon over the olive trees. Several US politicians openly said if there was not an Israel, they would invent one. The paper-signing murderers have nakedly admitted that Israel is a US military base, and it is. The US had funded $20 billion since October 7th. The colonists and occupiers of occupied Palestine fight the same way the colonists here did. They fight without heart and without courage. They do not fight wars. They get clapped in skirmishes, and they get clapped in actual battles, and then they go on to massacre women and children in villages. 1,000 Israelis do not have the courage of a mouse. This is also why the US uses Israel to test and refine weapons and military technology. The courageless colonists lose all conventional warfare. They do not fight for the suffering. They do not fight for a cause greater than themselves, and they do not fight for future generations. They fight because the capitalist ruling class's psychological warfare is a colonialism of the mind that causes them to commit colonialism upon the land and the lives of Palestine. This ongoing process is what converts Israelis from humans to husks, to experienceless racist mercenaries who will TikTok dance over mass graves. The courageless colonists commodify and sell their humanity. This privilege has horrific psychological costs. It sickens me to even imagine the process of what they go through. As much as I despise them, I pity them. This is also how I feel about the assimilators on this land too. I was asked to speak about reconciliation. Reconciliation is a bold-faced lie. It was a liberal marketing scheme that worked after 8 years of our conservative prime minister using racism to get elected. Many well-intentioned Indigenous and settler colonists voted for Baby Trudeau and his rhetoric of actually helping Indigenous peoples. Rhetoric that rings hollow when we see him getting elected 3 times with the same province, while at the same time spending over $8 million fighting Cindy Blackstock as she tries to get Indigenous kids fair treatment on reserves. While Baby Trudeau smiles, waves, and says nicer things than his father, who tried to extinguish our rights completely, he ultimately serves corporations like every other bourgeois bribe taker who removes power from the masses. He is not special. He is nothing more than a silver spoon in a cog in the capitalist machine. Baby Trudeau and reconciliation will represent a marketing scheme. They represent painting a peace sign on a police baton. We must look at the capitalist legacy of violence that precedes the federation of the illegitimate Canadian regime. Now, while it is important to note that while residential schools were created in 1880, the concept has been here longer. For more than 200 years, from the early 1600s to the 1800s, religious orders ran mission schools for Indigenous children. The precursors to the Government of Canada's residential school system. This is important to note because we see institutionalized violence towards Indigenous kids is older than this country as it exists today. It is important to know because it helps us understand conditions and the continuity of the residential school system with the so-called Child and Family Services, MCFD. This colonial violence has continued uninterrupted. Indigenous kids are 7.7% of the population, yet they comprise 52% of the kids in foster care. MCFD has taken more kids than residential schools have. So what we have is a continuation, a 4-century legacy of British corporations imposing violence, genocide, and building institutions that cement white supremacy. Colonialism has never ended here, and Canada upholds it internationally as well. The other thing to look at is the RCMP. Before Canada existed, the RCMP were mercenaries for the Hudson's Bay Company. Their role has never changed. They have always protected the capitalist theft of Indigenous resources. They are henchmen for the robber barons. Women and Indigenous people experience every day that police do not protect them. Academics and voracious readers use theory to understand that police protect property over people. We as Indigenous people learn this vitally just trying to survive. Today we have the CIRG, which is a special branch of mercenary cops, to protect oil corporations and the mining of our resources. The Community Industry Response Group has since rebranded their name to the Critical Response Unit. With these, we have the briefest examples of colonialism, Native history, dialectics, the power relation and hegemony remaining the same, the ruling class maintaining their class interest over centuries and inflicting different flavors of genocide for dollars. There is no reconciliation with genocide. The ruling class and Crown's relationship with us has remained the same, a feast for them with crumbs pushed off the table for everyone else. From Canada to Australia to the US to Israel, the mercenaries and colonists do not have the heart to win warfare. They turn to genocide tactics instead. They have done this to Yemen extensively. They lose battles, so they kill en masse with starvation, sanctions, deprivation of water, hygiene, dignity, medication, shelter, education, political autonomy, and so forth. The struggle in Canada is 400 years old. With our family in Palestine, the revolutionary struggle is 76 years old. 99% of the Celtic nation was exterminated. There were 30,000 of us. Less than 300 survived. Palestinians are still undergoing the chemical warfare in stage of open genocide. In time, the assimilation, excuses, and genocide apologia would flow like a river, but Israel will not survive 400 years. Israel's domination of the land would not survive a week without the United States and Britain. And though 99% of us were killed, we are still here. To highlight the infancy of the Canadian regime, let us look at the time frame. The Celtic nation has 14,000 years of archaeological evidence affirming our existence. In comparison, the 157-year federation of the Canadian regime is but a baby, unable to balance and stand on its own 2 feet. But after all the death waged against us, like our Palestinian family, we are still here. I have 9 hours of free, accessible educationals covering 19 topics. They mainly cover colonialism, history, Native struggles, feminism, Cuba, and contemporary analysis. I've also compiled 36 educationals to do with decolonization. Message me anytime and I will send them to you. My name on Facebook is Alex Reed. I'll chat with anybody, anytime who's interested in theory. I have a 2-hour educational on residential schools, and I can tell you, Israel will not exist long enough to put Palestinians in residential schools. just to touch on a couple other native stuff really quickly. Bolivia has survived over 190 coup attempts, and their plurinational state has a socialist economist president. It has the strongest support in legislation for Indigenous peoples in the world. When you get time, please check out their plan. Just type in Bolivia 14-point plan. Another thing is that Indigenous peoples across North America had won the wars. We could have wiped the barbarian colonists and their colonial government from the face of this continent. But that is not our way. We want self-determination of the land and resources. We want political autonomy. We want to build a society that is thriving for all. This is what land back is. It is not the colonial projection of violence and eviction. That assumption only speaks to the nature and beliefs of the person who assumes that. We allowed the colonists to remain, and it is only their ruling class that has built up this empire on betrayal and manipulation of the masses. Concessions and crumbs from imperialism is what historically kept them complacent. But the historic imperial privilege is fading, and they are coming to taste a sample of suffering that we have for 400 years. But we fight and demand to bring kinship with the land. There is more than enough resources and land here for all. We are not motivated by hate and greed. I would bet my life that if Palestinians were given the power to use a nuclear bomb against Israel, the overwhelming majority would not. This is the difference between the left and the right. We are driven by our humanity. The last thing I have time to say is that colonialism is ongoing. The 4 Indigenous people who overdose every day in this province and down these streets are manifestations of colonialism. All of it can be measured and understood scientifically with dialectical materialism. Lenin and those who expanded on his contributions to the theory after he wrote an estimated 35,000 pages. I want to participate with you one thing I witnessed in Cuba. In Spanish, viva means long live. I want to say something, and then I want you guys to shout viva. Viva Palestine! Viva! Viva Yemen! Viva! Viva Bangladesh! Viva! Viva Hassan Kanafani! Viva! Viva colonized peoples in the struggle against colonialism! Viva! Viva Cuba! Viva! Viva the feminist struggle! Viva! And viva the fight for a better tomorrow! Viva! All power to the people. Thank you for being here.